So I don't know if there's anyone here. If I'm looking around, I don't know that there's anyone here who was not here last week. Was it last week we talked about the Transfiguration? Yeah. So I want to revisit that a little bit. First of all, I'm going to put everybody on mute so that we don't have any background noise. And if you would like to speak or ask a question, just unmute yourself and jump in. Okay, but meanwhile, everybody is muted. So let's do that for a second. Okay. So I want to do kind of a simple lesson in how to approach the Bible and how to approach the mystery of Christ. And but I want to let's start by revisiting what we said briefly last week about the Transfiguration. And I think I was suggesting last week that in the Transfiguration, you have this picture of Christ in glory. And I think I may have compared it to like reading a mystery novel. So think of life as a mystery novel. You're born into this narrative that you're a part of, and there's a story going on here, and there's a drama going on, and everybody is wondering how it's going to end. You know, is the end of the world coming today? What's happening? What's the next chapter of life going to bring? So I'm just comparing life now to a drama and to a narrative, which in a way it is. It's the story of humankind, started way back with Adam and Eve, and seems like the story is going somewhere, but everybody wonders, how's the story gonna end? And what we have in the Transfiguration is a sneak preview of the final chapter. So we have an apocalypse. An apocalypse means, in Greek, the word apocalypse means an unveiling. So to apocalypse is to veil, and to apocalypse is to unveil. So the veil is lifted, or the curtain is pulled back. And for a brief moment in time, we see where all of this is headed. So it's almost as if eternity peeks its face through time and space in order to give us a glimpse of what the end of all things looks like. And what we find there is we find this person in glory, and everybody in his presence is also bathed in this glory. And I think I was saying last week too, that in order to fully appreciate each of our individual lives and to appreciate the story that we're all in as a whole, not just in the little fragmented chapter that we happen to be living in, the little piece that we're living in. So often our little space doesn't seem to make any sense, and nothing makes any sense unless it's seen as part of the whole. And what the Transfiguration reveals is that there is a wholeness at the end of time that is a wholeness of glory. And each of us, the Transfiguration doesn't say this in great detail, but the implication is each one of us is also a little participant piece in that glorious figure who was revealed there on the top of the mountain. And so later Jesus would talk about living in him and him living in us. And all of his teachings were aimed at trying to help us realize that our ultimate destiny is to be one with him as he was revealed in glory, and that his glory redounds to us, and that we will shine with the same glory that is in him and has been in him since the foundation of the world, and is now gradually being revealed to the world, and is gradually now actually even still being imparted to the world, even though there are powers that seem to militate against it, and even though there seem to be principalities and powers of darkness that obscure the glory, that somehow this glory that was with God in the beginning has now entered the human story. And it's in the process of glorifying what looks to be a very unglorious story of human history. So the process of glorification is going on, but in a very kind of hidden way, even though on occasion it breaks out into an epiphany or a manifestation of this same glory. So every once in a while, a person like John Paul II or Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa, they seem to be radiant with this glory. And if you ask them, how did you become so glorious? They would say, because I discovered the one who lives within me, and I discovered the one who lives within all of us. I discovered that the source of everything is this glory that was revealed on Tabor back there in time, but is still present now, making all things glorious. And in the book of Revelation, which is the book of the apocalypse, or the story of the final unveiling, Jesus in that book says things like, behold, I make all things new. And the one who wrote that book way back in the first century said, I've had a vision of the end times here. I've had a vision of where all of this is headed. I've had a vision of where this is going to culminate in. And I see a new heaven and a new earth. And I see that this earth and this heaven has been taken up into a more glorious, radiant reality that has come down from heaven. And so this world and that world above are becoming one. And I see it interiorly, and I'm writing about it in this very symbolic way in the book of the unveiling, or the book of Revelations. And I'm giving you a preemptive view. I'm giving you a revelation of what is to come and how you are part of what is to come. So we call that the eschatological imagination. Eschatology means the things in their fulfillment, things at the end of time, but also things in the fulfillment of their own nature. So a person who is totally fulfilled has already passed from death to life. A person who is fulfilled is not afraid of death because they realize there is a power of life within them that is greater than death. And if we refer back to the gathering a few weeks ago, they've actually even come to the further realization that the way they have passed beyond death is by embracing the practice of dying. That is to say, by embracing the practice of letting go of resentments, letting go of attachments, letting go of even good things to prefer the best. So the saints have all realized that death, as I was saying a few weeks ago, death is actually synonymous with the presence of Christ, because Christ is, within the life of the Trinity, the one who was always dying to self. He did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. So within the Trinity, the word Christ and the word death are synonymous, because they both refer to a mystery of relinquishment, or a mystery, as Meister Eckhart used to like to call it, a mystery of releasement. When I release my hold on life, I begin to live. When I don't spend all my time trying to secure my existence, the peace of God flows in me and gives me a life and a power and a vibrancy that I could never have as long as I keep holding on to life with a death grip. And this is what's at the heart of all of Jesus' parables. Those who would save their lives will lose those. In other words, those who try to control things will end up killing them. Those who let go of control will end up gaining everything. Okay, so everybody's kind of with me so far, okay? So let me just finish with one other metaphor. So when I was talking about the end already being revealed in the middle of the drama here, at the center point of history, which was the incarnate life, death, and resurrection of Christ. When I say that the end consummation is revealed right in the middle of the drama, another way you might think of that is, I think the image that is often used for how the end is already in the beginning. Was an acorn, when an acorn is born, the oak tree is also born, except the oak tree is not yet evident. Okay, there has to be a process. There's an unfolding of the acorn into the oak, and it requires certain conditions being present for that to happen. all of which have their own beginnings and ends in them, okay? But the acorn, under the right conditions, acorns become oaks. So you can say that the oak tree is already in the acorn, even though, but it's in there as a potential, okay? But all things being equal, it's unstoppable for the acorn. The acorn cannot not become an oak. Its destiny is to become an oak. So the glory of the acorn is already in the beginning of the acorn. Is everybody kind of following that logic? Now imagine the whole cosmos and every people in it as a single acorn. When we were created with a destiny for glory. And all things were actually created in a symphonic or harmonic union of acorns, all destined for their own kind of glory, encompassed in the glory of God. So the glory is in, the destiny to glory is inbuilt in the human person. And just as an acorn cannot not become an oak. Now, can you kill an acorn? Yes, you can. An acorn can be stopped, but its nature cannot be stopped. If it was set free, it would develop into what it is meant to be developed into. So we are the same way. And I went through some things a couple of weeks ago about how, given that nature in us, that we are destined for glory in a plenitude of goodness and a plenitude of truth and a plenitude of beauty, it's impossible for any of us not to yearn for union with that beauty, because that's how we are hardwired at the beginning. So I'm not going to go over all of this. I just want you to see that when we are born, we are destined for glory. And things happen then within this realm of finite creatures. Things happen that impede that unfolding to glory. The word that the Bible gives to that is evil, okay, or Satan. So, or powers and principalities. The powers, the so-called satanic powers, are those dynamics within the story that is going on here in history. The term satanic powers, or Satan or Beelzebul or whatever personifications have been given to it over time, they represent any movements within the human heart, any movements within the body politic, any movements within the world that obscure or blind people or make people insensitive to their true nature as creatures created for a participation in the glory of God. And Christ comes into the world in order to bring people back to a felt awareness of their original nature as creatures destined for glory. So lots of images occur here. I always use one of the beautiful Amish furniture that's been painted over by people trying to gild the lily. You know, they're trying to make it look better, or they want it to match their other living room furniture, so they start painting it red or green or varnish it. And in other words, they put layers and layers of what the church would call sin. Sin is any action, thought, or behavior that in my ignorance of my true destiny for glory, I assent to with the understanding or with the belief that it is going to make me glorious. I'm going to become glorious by becoming beautiful, or I'm going to become glorious by becoming famous. The temptations of Christ in the desert, where I always talk about the 4 P's. Pleasure, if you have this, you'll glow with glory. If you just indulge in this pleasure, that will light you up. See, if you think of yourself as destined for glory, then everybody is always reaching for glory without necessarily knowing what they're reaching for. They're reaching for beauty. They're reaching for truth. They're reaching for that which is good. Even when they do things that hurt, that end up hurting them, they did them because they believed they were going to make them good. Every person is hardwired to do good and to know the truth. You know, when somebody thinks they found the right spouse, they say, boy, I know this is the true one for me. And they grab onto him or her, and it turns out he doesn't meet all their needs. Oh my God, I was deceived about the truth. But at the time, I thought it was the true and right decision to make. And at every moment, every person does what they believe to be true, right, and good. It's impossible not to, because we are hardwired for glory. We are hardwired for union with the fullness of truth, with the fullness of beauty, with the fullness of goodness. So anything that we eat, I eat this lobster because, boy, is that good to eat. That's really good. I'm trying to ingest the good, but I've attached the good to this object or alcohol or whatever it might be. I've got to have this picture. This picture will make that room look good. This set of clothes will make me look good. Everything I do is an implicit yearning for the good. And everything I do because I believe it's true. It's the good and the truth are just two sides of the same thing that I'm yearning for. That which is going to fulfill me, and beauty is of a piece with that. We call those three things kind of the three dimensions of God: goodness, beauty, and truth. But people don't know that when they're searching those things, they're actually searching for God because they're ignorant. Most people are ignorant that there is a God. And even if they do believe in God, they don't make any association of God with their natural instincts to grab onto and to be possessed by and to possess that which is good, true, and beautiful. But everything we do is an attempt to beautify ourselves. We're trying to increase our own goodness. We're trying, and of course, this is the temptation of the evil one. So we're actually in the grip of the evil one without knowing it, because he's using our natural desire of God, our natural yearning for God, in order to try to get us to do that to ourselves. He's using our natural yearning for a goodness, truth, and beauty beyond ourselves. He tempts us to acquire those same things to apply to ourselves, because he insinuates in us from our very conception that you are not destined for glory. You are not worthy of glory. Nobody would have created you for glory. So you have to make your own self glorious. You can't depend on God. And that was the temptation that he gave to Adam and Eve. You can't believe him. He's just jealous. He's trying to keep this tree for himself. You got to get it for yourselves. So Christ comes into this world to try to bring us back to a felt sense of our openness and desire and infinite yearning for the one who created us for himself, which is the God of glory. Okay, having said all that, now how does Jesus do this? Okay, and this is what I kind of want to talk a little bit about today, to try to show you how gentle he is, and yet how gentle he is, and yet how I'm looking for the right word here. Well, let me just start where I'm going to start here. Okay. So I'll recount three gospels that we've had this week that will get me closer to what I'm babbling to say here. Okay, so the first one, I'll start today and move backwards to Monday. So we've had three gospels this week. The one today was Jesus said, I have not come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come to fulfill them. Okay, that's the first gospel from today. So I'm not here to badmouth everything that has gone before me, even though he seemed to be bad-mouthing it. You see, this is why he felt a need to explain himself, because earlier in the same gospel, this is from Matthew, earlier in the same gospel, Jesus did at least people were listening to him, thought he was bad-mouthing the law, because he said, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, love those who hate you and pray for those who persecute you. Well, when he was making a contrast between you have heard it said, who had they heard it said by? They had heard it said by Moses. And Moses was the one who brought the law of God to them. And all the scribes and the Pharisees listening to Jesus were adherents to the law. And he said, and then, probably even when he was 12 years old in the temple, he probably was doing some of this same stuff. And many times in his ministry, they would say to him, are you greater than our father Moses? And he said, well, Moses said to you, you shall not be angry. You shall not kill. But I tell you, you shall not even be angry. All the time they're thinking, who is this guy? Is he greater than our father Moses? Now, they never asked him that specific question, are you greater than our father Moses? But had they would have said, there is something greater than Moses here. He said, there is something greater than Solomon here. The men of Solomon's time will arise. The queen of the south will arise and condemn the people of this generation. That's who he's talking to. He's talking to the people. He says, the queen of the south will arise and condemn all of you because she traveled from the ends of the earth to listen to the wisdom of Solomon, and something greater than Solomon is here, referring to himself. Well, that's when they started to tear their garments and pull out their hair. He said, the men of Nineveh will arise and condemn this generation because they believed in the prophet Jonah, but there's something greater than Jonah here. Then they said, are you greater than our father Abraham? And he said, before Abraham was, I am. So he was always making himself greater than what they had. But in today's gospel, he goes out of his way to say, yes, I am giving you something different than you've ever had before. I'm paraphrasing now. However, I'm not here to tell you that what you've done to this point is bad. In fact, it's good. And anybody who speaks against it will not be held in high esteem at the end, because it's absolutely necessary. Can we close that door? We're getting a little noisy out.
Somebody's coming.
Thank you. Close the door. Close this door, Kathy. Just this door. Just close this one.
I'm closing myself out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that too. Okay, so now I want to talk about these three gospels in tandem because they're all connected. But let me just again, keeping in mind that we're destined for glory, but things interfere with it. And Jesus says, I've not come to badmouth the law, but I've come to fulfill it. Okay. So putting those two things together, I want you to think of this. So the key word that he uses there is I've come to fulfill. What does it mean when he says that? What does he mean, I've come to fulfill the law? What he means is I've come to reveal to you a way of living that is to your law the way the transfiguration was to my just being here as a teacher. Okay, let me say that again. When I say I've come to fulfill the law, I've come to shed a light on it, and I've come to overwhelm it with such a light that the light you thought you were getting from it will be rendered irrelevant and almost not worth paying attention to. So here's some analogies for what I'm talking about. I'll give my best one at the end, but the analogy is, and many early church fathers used this analogy. Before the coming of Christ, everybody in the darkness, which is the darkness of the world and the darkness of Satan, in other words, people living in ignorance of their true destiny, people living as if the world is created for dog eat dog, get there before the selfish people, look out for number one. Everybody living in that darkness. And this is how most of us are educated. Even in Catholic schools, we're educated to get ahead. even if that means climbing over people. Get ahead. That's the world of darkness, okay? It comes as natural to us as fish swimming in water, and you ask them, how do you like the water? They would know what you were talking about. Okay, so our way of trying to glorify ourselves is so second nature to us that we are living in complete darkness, but we are going by certain rules. We even have religion in this darkness, and it's called the religion of rules and regulations. And that's what the Jews lived by. And what Jesus was saying to them essentially is, when you were in total darkness, my Father gave you the law. And the law was like a candle. The law was a light. And you were able to read by candlelight. So there was a little bit of your darkness dispelled when you had the law. And until the kingdom comes, nobody will ever be able to say a word against that light that my Father gave you, because it did allow you to read, and it did allow you to see his face to a certain extent, gave you a small glimpse of the light to come. But I fulfill that light because I am the light of the world. So the fulfillment that Christ brings is what the transfiguration is to the light of the candle. In the light of the transfiguration, you can't even see the candle anymore, because it was the brightest light that ever appeared on the earth. Okay, or you can just think of people who used to read by candlelight. And when the sun rose in the morning, what would they do? They didn't need the candle anymore, so they put the candle out. So what Jesus is saying is, the law has served its purpose to kind of take away one layer of darkness from you, but I am here to strip you completely of all the cosmetic glory. I'm mixing metaphors here, but I think you're following me. I've come here to remove. I'm God's cold cream. I've come here to remove all the layers of self-glorification that you have added in your ignorance, to restore you, not only to restore you, but to enhance you with the glory that you are destined for to the end of time. And that is the vision from the early church that I'm always talking to you about. God became man so we can become God. Jesus came into the world with the glory of God, and he takes us and he imparts that glory to us. And he also gives us the wherewithal to dissolve any impediments within our own lives and within our world that obscure that glory. So that glory, as it were, is implanted in us in our baptism or in any act of openness to God. That glory is implanted, and it shines out more or less in a person's life to the extent that they've been able to strip themselves of all the impediments to the radiance of that glory showing forth in their lives. But we continue to hold on to too many things interiorly that block that. But that's what Christ gives, and that's how all Christians are meant to exist. So the other images I want to use for Christ fulfilling the law, I wrote these down this morning. And this shows you the gentleness of Jesus. He wants us all to be as radiant with the glory of God, not just at the end of time, but right now. He wants us to be so radiant with the glory of God that the thought of death completely disappears, and that death itself is embraced, because death is the way, dying to my attachments, dying to my relationships. I mean, dying to my attachment to my relationships is the key to the glory of God possessing me completely. It already possesses me completely, but for it to be manifest, I must die to everything that I'm holding on to in my heart. My heart has to go from a tight, grasping, controlling, possessive mystery within me, and it has to die. I have to have a heart transplant. I have to recognize that heart is dead, and I need a new heart. And it's the act of dying. It's the act of faith. It's the act of letting go, that immediately my heart is replaced. I have an invisible heart transplant every time I let go of an interior attachment. I get a new heart. I get a new, or I should say, my new heart gets more healthy cells until such time as there's no obstacles. And so now I live in God and for God and with God and through God. And I don't even have a thought about where the future goes, because the future of my glory is already present and reigning within me. So that's what sanctity means. Okay. But Jesus knows most of us don't have that happen immediately. It did happen immediately to St. Paul. It happened it didn't happen immediately to Mother Teresa. It happened to her over time, but she did have most saints have a defining moment that they can point to when all of what I'm saying to you now became clear to them in some sort of intuitive way. They may not have expressed it this way, but they suddenly become aware that God is infinitely present to me, whereas before I thought he was infinitely distant from me. And a function of his transcendence is to be able to be intimately present to me. And when people realize they and God are one, and really that sinks in, everything can change almost immediately. But for most of us, it takes a long time so the transfiguration comes in and makes the candle irrelevant. But most of us, in the light of the transfiguration, go blind. It's too much. Okay, so let me give you some examples. A little kid. So in the spiritual life, we all start out as little kids. Okay, so little kid comes to first grade, and the teacher so let's just say the teacher, I'm comparing the teacher to Jesus. Let's say the teacher is a scientist greater than Albert Einstein. Okay, the teacher is very conversant with quantum mechanics and quarks and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and Bohr's theory of relativity and Max Planck's vision of the synchronicity of matter and energy, knows all this. And in come the first graders. He wants them to understand quantum computing. But he starts off by saying 1 + 1 = 2. Oh, yeah, it does. Ooh, and it never doesn't mean that. In other words, one iota of this formula is never going to change. 1 + 1 is always going to = 2. And this teacher who comes in with infinite knowledge and infinite wisdom and a perfect vision of where he wants this young mathematician to go, knows that the mathematician has to learn to crawl before he can walk or she can walk, and then walk before she can run, and then run before she can fly. And this is how Jesus fulfills the law. And it's so hard for him. This is the real passion of Christ. It's actually the passion of me as well, okay? I'm going to give you another example here. He wants to feed us. He's like who's the great chef in Pauk, Wolfgang Puck, Pauk, or the Food Channel. Find the Hell's Kitchen. Whoever's the greatest chef you know. Did anybody ever see the movie Babette's Feast? Oh, yeah. If you've never seen Babette's Feast, see Babette's Feast. It's a story of a French woman who's a stranger over in Norway. She's an indentured servant, but she's also the most accomplished French chef that has ever lived. And I can't remember exactly what happened in France, but she had to leave Paris and she fled to Norway and she indentured herself to this family. She worked as a scullery maid. This is so good with Christ too, because he worked as a carpenter. And yet she was the most accomplished chef in France. She had to eat this crap every day that the Norwegians and she had to prepare it. And that's all they wanted to eat. They just wanted to eat this Norwegian gruel. And it just was painful for her to have to cook this stuff. And she wanted to do something different, but she didn't have the wherewithal, and they had no interest in receiving it. So one day she wins the lottery. So everybody in the town's wondering what's she going to do with all this. And she said, I'll tell you what I'm going to show you. She said, I'm going to share this with you. I'm paraphrasing here because I'm not getting this exactly right, but I know how it ends and I know what a great image this is. If you've not seen Babette's Feast, rent it, watch it, see it. It's the perfect metaphor for what I'm talking about here. It's the perfect metaphor for what Christ desires for us. Think of Christ as this woman. So she gets this £1,000,000. So what does she do? She orders wine from France. She orders food from all over the continent. All these deliveries are being made, and she calls the whole town together, all these grim Norwegians, you know, who hate each other. She's got the Lutherans together with the others. She gets them all at the table. They're all grim-faced, you know, and they've all got this religion of law and order, you know, and they're all very straight-laced and they're very conservative, and none of them are supposed to drink. But when she brings out the French wine, they say, well, to honor our host, I guess we should try it. And after half an hour, they're all getting tipsy and they're starting to have friends. And she brings out like 10 or 12 courses of the finest French prepared stuff. She, you know, plucks all the chickens herself. She cooks the roast duck. She's got trifles. She's got every conceivable dessert. She spends the whole £1,000,000 on one meal. And in the process, she transforms this whole community and they become friends. And that's an image of the kingdom of God. Okay, so think of Babette's Feast as where God wants to take all people. He wants us, he uses that image, the heavenly banquet. It's Babette's Feast. He wants to feed us with something that, a meal of divine goodness, beauty, and truth of which we cannot conceive. And our palates are not acclimated to. And that's the only thing he desires to give us. But he comes into this world and he looks at us as people eating McDonald's. And I have, you know, I've had to go to confession many times for this, and I'm going to go again because I say it and I can't help saying it. It's the greatest suffering for me without actually knowing it, but because I can't judge anybody and I don't judge anybody, but I always think of anybody who still comes to Mass as coming for Catholic fast food. I've come to Mass, I've got my sacraments, I've done my duty, now I want to get on with life. It's not like that. I can't feed on fast food. I have to, but the gentleness of Jesus, because he's like water, my son always reminds me of that, be like water. He accommodates himself. He stoops down to the level of the readiness of the person. So the teacher steps down and teaches arithmetic, and then slowly, gradually, or to the extent that the person is open, brings them to algebra. And then when he's sure that they've mastered algebra, he brings them to calculus. And when he's sure they've measured calculus, he brings them to whatever the next physics or quantum theory or nuclear computing, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, algorithm determination, etc. So he does it gradually. Now, there are some like St. Paul who have been studying only arithmetic their whole life, and all of a sudden, through a revelation and a complete break, they just know quantum computing. And they wake up and they look back at what they did and they say, I regard everything I did previous to this as so much refuse. Compared to what I know now, compared to this food that I'm eating now, that stuff is utterly horrid. And yet it's not horrid in itself. It's what we need at a certain point in order to get to the next certain point. But the Christian life must always be lived from the end point backwards, not from the starting point forwards. All of us start as neophytes and novices. We all start feeding on milk and bread, but God is constantly trying to enlarge our appetite for true food. My flesh is true food, meaning my life, the life that I've come to give you. I've come that they may have life and have it in abundance. The life that I will give you is true life, the life of the new age. When he says eternal life, The real translation of that is the life of the age, the new age. And the new age is now for those who are aware that there is a glory available to them through the act of letting go. Okay? The next gospel is very much like that. So I hope you're following me here, that you've got to keep in mind our destiny for glory. I have to keep in mind that my appetite is in the process of being refined. I have to keep in mind that the artificial self-glorification that I've indulged in my whole life has to be dissolved by the power of the Holy Spirit. All that it takes for it to be dissolved is the desire for it to be dissolved. And the willingness and the developing awareness also through the Holy Spirit, the developing an awareness of when I'm developing an attachment. And I can always tell when I'm developing attachment because my nose is bent out of shape when I don't get my way. And the Holy Spirit, if I'm willing, will make me so ultra sensitive to when I'm starting to take control again that he will indict, the touch of his mercy will feel like an indictment because you'll hear the words in your psyche, there you go again. This is only going to cause you trouble. So all the warnings in the gospel are warnings of mercy trying to deliver you from a path you're going down that you haven't yet been able to quickly recognize is a path towards death. Hell. You're going to hell. You're on your way to hell. When Jesus says that, he doesn't mean I'm sending you there. I'm coming to awaken you so you stop going down that road. Okay? So that leads me to go back to gospel number 1 here. I got to remember what it is. Right. So we'll go to Monday's gospel to illustrate this point. So, we're going to go Monday and Tuesday's gospel. So in Monday's gospel, and we're taking a step back now. So I hope you got everything I just said, because I'm going to come back to it, but I'm not going to continue it right now. Though if I don't stop talking, I will. So let's go back to the beginning. When Jesus first started his ministry, and we have a glimpse of this in Monday's gospel, it's the first sermon he ever gave. It's the first time he really tried. So remember, Jesus' mission into this world is to dispel the darkness, not just with a candle, but with the transfiguration that he knows himself to be. I am the light of the world. And he wants us to have all that light at one time. And he knows that even when he talks as a simple human being, as a teacher, the light is too much for people. He says, I speak and they remain blind. I speak and they cannot hear. My voice still has the effect of blinding them. The light that I am still blinds them. They don't get me. Very few people get me. In fact, nobody got him. That was his struggle. So he, as a human being, he was constantly trying to learn. I mean, he had to learn how do I adjust the light that I am and the light that burns within me and the glory that I know myself to be as the only begotten of the Father. How do I transform this light? How do I translate this light into a frequency that can break through the darkness here? And he had to learn that. And you can see him learning it in the Gospels if you're attentive to what I'm saying here. So we can see it. So the first time he comes in, now he's filled with light. All he wants to do, he knows that people, by self-glorifying themselves, while they think they're growing closer to God, and part of their self-glorification is the practice of their own religion, because the more they practiced their religion, the more glorious they felt they were in the sight of God. So one of the major challenges of Jesus and of me and of any priest who knows what he's doing is you have to dismantle people's pride in their own religion. Religion that is unaware of itself, religion that is not a partaking of the glory of the transfiguration and a recognition that all that glory that I have comes from him, not from me. And it's a total gift to me, not anything I do by being good or following the rules and regulations. We have to dismantle the notion that the righteous practice of religion makes me more glorious in God's eyes. It does just the opposite. It puts another barrier in you, in your heart, because you are now holding on to your image of yourself as a religiously righteous person. And that's functioning as a veil over the glory of God in you. So the glory of God comes to dispel all artificial versions of the glory of God, including many people's practice of religion. Now, Jesus did not, he knew, he had to learn some of this as he was going along as a human being. So he enters the synagogue in Nazareth where he grew up, okay? And he says to them, what does he say to them? He said, you will say, he said, so they're real proud of themselves, and they're real proud, and he starts preaching because he is trying to puncture their self-righteousness. Because see, there's no self-righteousness in him. He did not deem equality with God something to be grasped at. Jesus is walking death. By that I mean Jesus is walking letting go-ness. Jesus is walking unpossessiveness. Jesus is the mystery of nothingness. Jesus is the mystery of no ego. Jesus is the mystery of God's own self. And it has no control in it. It has no possessiveness. And when he looks in this world, all he sees is people holding on to things and being afraid and being self-righteous. So he thinks the way to operate here, this is me interpreting now, but I'm not alone in all of this. He thinks initially in his naivete as a human being, because he's God, but he's also learning this stuff. He's learning how to be God in a human mode according to human limitations. So he has to learn what's going to work with these people and what's not going to work with these people. He knew it was going to be a challenge. In fact, he knew it was going to end in his death. He knew that. He just knew they were so not going to get him that eventually they were going to do him in. He knew that. He could feel it. Nevertheless, his love for them impelled him to find a way to get through to these people. And so the first way he thought was, well, I'll just go in there and puncture their self-righteousness. So on Monday, in his first sermon in Nazareth, he starts out like a lot of ordained priests, like me in the beginning. Remember my father calling me aside after one of my first homilies, because he stayed there the first week after I was ordained. He called me aside and he said, he says, Phil, he says, you might get a little more with honey than with vinegar. He said, people don't necessarily like to hear they're doing it wrong. I said, well, we are. Well, Jesus wasn't quite like that, but he did. You could see the burr under his saddle here. And how would it not be? I mean, everything that he's found in our world was like fingernails on the blackboard to him, because it was totally foreign to the place he came from. All these rivalries and pushing and shoving and trying to get ahead and putting each other down. He, coming from the Father and the Trinity, he was not familiar with any of this. So all those things were blows to his psyche. He was like being pounded into shape by the human race, and it only redounded to his own glory, ultimately. Anyway, in that first homily, he says, okay, you people, I'll tell you, let me just remind you. I can just see him say, he wouldn't have said it like I say it, but if I was him, I would have said it something like this. Let me just remind you people in this synagogue here that during the time of Elijah, there were lots of widows in Israel. Remember that famine we had back there in the time of Elijah, 3 years without rain and water? And you'd think if God were going to work a miracle, he'd work it for one of his chosen people here in Israel. But I tell you, though there were many widows in Israel and lots of people in need of Israel, it wasn't any widow of Israel that he gave the water. He gave it to a widow in Zarephath, in the land of Sidon, that place that you people despise. And he says, oh yeah, you want another example? He says, in the time of King, who was it? In the time of Elijah, Elisha. In the time of Elisha, the other prophet, there were many lepers in Israel. God could have plunged them into the Jordan River and saved them, but he only gave his miracle to Naaman, the Syrian, in another land that all you people hate. And what was their reaction after he told them that they were not, that God was more pleased with the other nations than he was with Israel? They took him out to the edge of the hill wanting to throw him over, and he walked away. He got away somehow. And then he thought to himself, this is not quite working the way I thought it was good. So he realized, so here's the most important point I wanted to make today, because it dovetails with what I said earlier as well. It dawned on him, I believe, in light of that first homily where his confrontational, his simply coming in and telling them the truth. I am the way, the truth, and I'll just tell you the truth. You're far from God. The widows in Zarephath were more worthy than you. The lepers in Syria were more worthy than you. And the result of that was they got mad at him. Well, he came to deliver them from their hard-heartedness. But when he tried to deliver them with the head-on method of confrontation, he suddenly realized that when I teach that way, they become more hard-hearted. He realized, and this was the scandalous line I was going to start this session with, but I'll give it to you now. Jesus realized he was a near occasion of sin for the Jews. His very presence pissed them off more than they already were, because he stood as an indictment of them. Everything that he was, they were not. And yet he is the true Israelite. Now they projected all their hatred on him and said, who are you to tell us? But it was envy that they were feeling. And he realized, if I'm going to win them over, I have to change tactics here. So then he changes tactics to telling parables. And his theory is this. So you can see this drama of salvation. So he takes an oblique form of confronting them that is not as harsh, in the hopes that a softer approach will give them enough space and enough permission to be able to self-identify with what he's saying, be touched by what they see, and change. Okay? And on Tuesday's gospel, he tells a parable that reveals what he's trying to do, as well as reveals where he's trying to get people. So let me remind you of that parable. In all of these parables, whenever Jesus tells a parable, you have to remember there's a difference between the language of the parable and the purpose of the parable. The purpose of the parable is to scare the people out of their own hard-heartedness. Well, it's really to awaken them. But because they are so hard-hearted, and because the only thing most of them understand is getting hit over the head by a 2x4, he knows that if I hit him over the head with a 2x4 by myself, all it does is cause them to want to hit me back stronger. And that's what I'm trying to deliver them from. So I can't pick up the same tools of violence that I'm going to cause them to pick up. So I'm going to pick up a gentler tool called the parables. But the content of the parables is often going to include stories of people getting hit over the head by a 2x4, not because that's what I would do, but that's because that's what they would understand as a form of awakening in the parable and in their own lives. Okay, so Jesus is juggling a lot of balls here, trying to awaken them, and he's trying to finesse this because he knows how easily they will go off on him. So he's trying to do an end around. He's trying to do a jujitsu. He's trying to go with the flow here, and he's trying to take them where they are, but he's always trying to move them from algebra to calculus to quantum mechanics, but they want to hold on to arithmetic. Okay. And trying to pull their book away from them is not going to work. He found that out in the first class. Okay. So he's going to try to put the like my mother did getting me to take medicine. He's going to put it in some applesauce, and the applesauce with the medicine, which is going to cure them, even though it's going to taste bitter because they're not used to it. The applesauce is going to be the telling of parables. Okay, now I'm going to just tell this one parable because it's parables like this that cause the most confusion to people who do not understand that the dynamics of the parable, the story that Jesus tells, is not the purpose of the parable. The purpose of the parable is to have the scary story scare them out of their willingness to scare others. He's going to tell some stories about hard-hearted people so that those listening to the stories about the hard-hearted people will identify with the hard-hearted people and stop being so hard-hearted. But he also is going to realize, and this is my maybe most delicate point for today, he's also going to realize that the parables end up having the same effect on his listeners that the confrontational method had. They hear, but they do not, they hear, they listen, but they do not hear. They see, but they see, but they do not perceive. So that there's a reaction to the parables as well, but it's the opposite one that he was hoping it would have. So let me give you an example of one of the, and I'll show you how tricky these parables are. So my point here is always distinguish, he's telling the parable for the purpose of bringing them out of the way of hard-heartedness. And the parables often include a choice between the way of let me put it this way as I did on Tuesday. In the parables, like the one I'm going to recount here in a second, he offers them the way of mercy, as opposed to the way of malice or the way of hard-heartedness. And he tells parables that lay out these two ways, because in telling the parable, he's laying out the same two ways to them, but in an indirect way by telling the parable. If he just came up and said, hey, there's two ways out there for you, my way and your way, they would say, we're going to highway. I'm going to say, Earl said, if Jesus just said, there's my way and your way, they would have said, hit the highway. That's true. That's very true. But he is saying, I am the way, the truth, and life. But the other way, you see, leads to perdition. But here's the really important point. This is the point that so few people are able to grasp. When he says the other way leads to perdition, when he says that in parables, even when he says that in his teaching, he doesn't mean I send you to perdition. He says, if you don't take my way, you will end up in a place of perdition. And even in that place of perdition, I will be there trying to bring you back to the way that leads to mercy. Okay, and that's evident in the parables as well. But when you see that there are two ways, you think God is standing at the crossroads saying, you go down that way and you go down that way. And that's not how it happens. The two ways are laid out to us in parabolic form and in life. And we choose which way we want to go down. But even if we go down the way of perdition, he's never not there, because in fact, he allows us, he doesn't interfere with us going down to the way of perdition, because the way of perdition itself often leads to the way of mercy, because people get so fed up with it that they finally break. So anyway, so what's the parable? So the parable he tells yesterday is there was a man who owed his master a great debt. Now, our temptation is to identify the master with God and the other people with Jesus, and don't do that in the parables. Just listen to the story and don't draw any conclusions. Just see what's being laid out there. So he says there. So who's he telling this parable to? He's telling it to people whom he experiences as very unforgiving, very malicious, very hard-hearted. He's always he's telling the parables to everybody, but he's aiming the parables at his biggest adversaries, the people who every time they see him, they get angrier. And he's trying, and he can't not see them because he's come to save them. He's come to save them from that which they can't see about themselves. They can't see how angry they're getting. They can't see that their whole life is a reaction to him rather than an openness to God. They can't see it. They're blind. He can see it, but he doesn't know how to make them see it. So he's trying everything as a human being that he can think of to try to get them to see it. But he knows the very sight of him just makes them double down on their own perdition. We call this the doubling of sin and hell. Jesus was trying to bring people out of sin, but very often the effect that Jesus had on people was to put them further into their sin. And that's actually what led him eventually to realize the only possible thing that is going to change these people if I stop teaching altogether and just let them have their way with me. Maybe that will do it. So his death on the cross was really a final awareness on his own part, which I believe happened in the Garden of Gethsemane, realizing nothing I can do is going to work other than letting them kill me. And maybe the sight of what they've done to me, maybe my Father will use that as a mirror of their own maliciousness and awaken them from their maliciousness. Maybe something will touch their heart in putting to death someone they know to be innocent. Maybe they will be shamed out of their shame. That was his hope, because he had nothing left to give except letting go of it all. Okay, now that I don't want to get detoured with that, but I just want to show you that's how the drama plays out. He tries the confrontational mode, he tries the parabolic road, and finally he just relinquishes his hold on it altogether and commends them all to the Father and commends himself to the Father and lets the Holy Spirit do the rest. He's done everything he can do as a human being. Now he will do it as a life-giving spirit. Okay, coming back to the parable. So, but remember, in every parable, no matter what form it takes, no matter what characters it has, every parable is told for the purpose of awakening people or pulling people out of the way to perdition, or whoever the bad guys are in the story. Those are the people he's telling the story for the purpose of helping them avoid the end to which the bad guys in the story always come. The tricky part of that is the bad guys in the story always seem to come to a bad end at the hands of God. And that's not really the case, because it's God who's trying to save the bad guys from the end that they come to in those stories. But the only God that the people know to whom Jesus is telling the stories, the only God they know is the kind of God that would do to the bad guys in the story what is done to the bad guys in the story. So Jesus lets their concept of God be in place, even though the purpose in telling the story is to open them to both a new concept of God and to keep them from going to the fate that they believe they will have at the hands of God as the result of the behaviors they're engaging in. That was good. I can't say it again, but I hope you got that. And if you didn't, you can go back and watch it on the video again, okay? Okay, so the story goes like this. So there was a man who had owed his master a great debt, was unable to pay, fell down before the master and said, please forgive me my debt. Please give me time. I will repay you. And the master, of course, most people identify this with God, and Jesus says, okay, if you want to identify it with God, God's not really like that, but if you want to do that, go ahead. And he assumed they would, and he assumes we will. So God, so moved by his request, forgave him the whole debt. And then that forgiven servant went out and found one of his own servants who owed him a much smaller amount. You can see that Jesus is doing he's playing with hyperbole here, okay? Okay, so he owed the master $1 million and he runs into one of his own slaves who owes him 50 cents. And he takes the slave by the neck and he starts throttling him and he says, pay me that debt. And he says, oh, yes, master, I will. Give me time. And he says, I'm not giving you time. And he threw his whole family into prison until the debt could be paid. And then in the story, and this is really the figure of Jesus in the story, the fellow slaves, fellow servants, and Jesus is a servant. So the real, if you want to read Jesus into the story, he's in the fellow servants who say, this is not right. He was just forgiven a huge debt, and he's now unforgiving with his slaves. What gives here? So they go to the master and they say, hey, this is not fair. The guy you forgave $1 million, he won't even forgive our coworker 50 cents. And the master turns, the master says, what is this? Bring him in here. So he brings the first guy and he says, what the hell are you doing? He says, again, we read God into this, okay? And Jesus allows that because all he's interested in is that the bad guys he's talking to will see themselves as the unforgiving servant in this. And if they want to believe that what's going to happen to them is happened to the servant in the story, because what happened to the servant in the story? The master says, well, if you wouldn't forgive him, then I'm reneging on my forgiveness of you. I want you to go into prison until you've paid the last penny, and you're not going to get out until you do. Okay. So the point of the parable is forgive as you have been forgiven. Be forgiving. Okay. And he's telling it to people that he knows to be unforgiving. So in the parable, he's saying there are two ways available here to you. There's the way of forgiveness that leads to joy, and there's the way of unforgiveness or hard-heartedness or malice that leads to imprisonment. Now, if we really knew Jesus, what he was saying there is, you're not being imprisoned by God. God is allowing you to go into a state where you're going to, in other words, if you do what I'm asking you to do, it will only get better. If you don't do what you're being offered in this parable, it will only get worse. People imagine what getting worse will look like and who will do it to them. But Jesus is not saying anything about God. He's saying about two ways that are available to us. If you don't take the offer that's being given to you, it will not end well for you. And if he were to say something further, he would say, and I don't want it not to end well for you. And even if it does not end well for you, like the lost sheep, I will then go in search of you then and offer you, try to find another way of getting you out of the mire that you keep getting yourself into. That's why Jesus tells other parables about the lost sheep and the lost coin and the man in search of the lost person, the prodigal son. He's always in search of those who have gone off the rails, but he's offering a rail. Now that's in concert with, so what he's saying there is that if people don't accept what he is offering them, they will double down on in hearing this parable about forgiveness. If they choose not to accept it, their unforgiveness will double inside of themselves. The parables always present a crisis for people, because to reject the parable, like to reject the offer in the gospel, in the actual parable itself, is to double up on what you were being offered to be taken out of. So even the parables had a doubling effect on some people, though they were intended to bring them out of their mendacity and their malice and their hard-heartedness. People who would not identify with the bad guys in the parable and would not have the conversion that was being offered in the parable end up in twice the worst state than they were even before they heard the parable. And this dynamic is what is behind those sayings in the gospel that baffle us so often. And I want to read a couple of them to you. Remember when Jesus would say, to those who have, more will be given, and to those who do not, even what they have will be taken away. That sounds so unfair. He's simply, he's describing this dynamic. Those who accept what I'm offering to them in the parable will get even more. If you accept forgiveness, you'll get even more forgiveness. If you reject it, even what forgiveness you had will be taken away. You'll lose what you thought you had if you don't accept what I'm offering to give you. To refuse the offer of God is to double down on my own perdition. Nothing to do with God, having everything to do with me. The other one is, you remember when Jesus said, beware of the guy swept his house clean of a demon, and then 7 returned worse than itself. You remember Jesus said to the rich man, come and follow me. Be hot or cold, don't be lukewarm, otherwise I'll vomit you out of my mouth. These hyperbolic statements of Jesus are saying exactly the same thing. If you take the way I am offering you, your life will go from good to better to best. If you refuse what I'm saying and double down on your current posture, you'll continue to lose. It's like a gambler. You're putting your money on the wrong thing. You're just going to keep doubling down. You're going to keep putting more money on it, and you're going to be exponentially out of money. That's what's going to happen. What's the other one? The other one. Give and it will be given to you. The measure with which you measure out will be measured back to you. In other words, there's a reciprocal effect. If you give, you will receive. If you take, you will lose. If you empty, you will be filled. If you try to fill, you'll go empty. These parables, the paradoxes of Jesus are just that. There are 2 ways available to you: my way or your way. Your way leads to misery. My way leads to mercy. And the secret is that even if you choose misery, misery itself will eventually self-destruct. Misery will eventually lead you to cry for mercy, in which case I will be there for you. But I would spare you that hell. I would spare you that agony. I would spare you that torture. All these images of the torturers. Notice it wasn't the master who did the punishment here today in the parable that I just told you about the unforgiving servant. You could look at all these parables that I've quoted and look at very subtle differences. It's usually not the master who punishes. He handed this man over to the torturers. Well, the torturers were the consequences of his own behavior. The torturers are the guilty conscience that comes because we're built in for glory and wired for glory. The moment we do something that is inglorious, no matter how much we think it's adding to our own glory, it creates a tension in us. It creates a qualm of conscience. It creates a need to cover something up. We have a feeling of unease and anxiety. It comes from the fact that we've tried we've done something, or we've thought something, or we've engaged in something that is not of the glory of God. It's of our own mendacity. It's of our own self-godification. It's an effort at our own self-glorification. That's what it is. And that always creates a pain in us. We might sweep it under, we might try to get rid of our conscience, but it'll show up in our dreams, it'll show up in our actions. God's timing is always perfect. God will allow the misery in our lives to continue to increase until we break. And that misery that's increasing is the result of our own layer upon layer upon layer of ego covering up our original nature as God's perfect person who's meant to be like a little child. Princess and the Pea, all those mattresses on the pea, trying to get it not to bug me, but the life of God, my true self, is always there, making my false self a bit uncomfortable. And that we can call that my conscience, or we can call that the life of glory in me, or we can call that my true self, or we can call that God, the Trinity present within me. It's all those things. And it cannot be denied. I can cover it up as much as I want, but anything I cover it up with is not as strong as the power within me. My destiny for glory and my original identity in God at the moment of my conception, like the acorn and the oak, it can never not come to fruition. It can be delayed for many, many years. It can be covered over. It can be varnished over. It can be lacquered over. It can be like Houdini. You can put it in a chest and put 1,000,000 locks on it. And Jesus comes to undo all those locks. But if I say to, hey, hell with you, if I get rid of these locks, I'm going to be vulnerable. And then I put more locks on. Jesus says, well, after a while, I just got to stop helping here. Maybe you'll just, you'll after you imprison yourself long enough, I'll still listen for that little voice inside the chest. Help me. And when that voice happens, like a good neighbor, I'll be there. The State Farm Insurance is another great analogy of how the divine mercy shows up. So now I've thrown a lot of things together for you, okay? But I want you to see that everything that Jesus does is gentle. Everything that Jesus does is gradual, but there's also an impatience in him to move us from arithmetic to quantum physics, from the light of the candle to the light of the transfiguration, from McDonald's fast food and worse, junk food, spiritual junk food. I look at most Catholicism as McDonald's, and I look at most Protestantism like junk food. It's all junk food, but McDonald's is a step up from junk food. But none of it is the fare of the kingdom. It's all there. And actually, when we receive the Eucharist, we receive the food of the kingdom. But it tastes like McDonald's if our taste has not been refined enough by feeding on other food like the bread of life, which is what these Wednesday gatherings are intended to be. So Jesus is impatient to get us to live from the point of our ultimate glory in God. He wants us to see ourselves already as transfigured by Christ. Do you remember the image of the burning bush in the garden, in the desert, when Moses came on the burning bush? And he saw, we call that a theophany or an epiphany. It's a manifestation of God's glory. The bush was glowing. It was bright with the light of the transfiguration to the extent that the Jews could behold it. In fact, Moses would go into the tent and he would be bathed in the light of God. All these are Old Testament prodromal images of the transfiguration. And the transfiguration itself is the preview or the proleptic glimpse of what the whole world is going to look like at the end of time. The whole world is going to be glowing like the burning bush in the desert or Christ on Mount Tabor. It's going to be vivid with the life of God. It's going to be enveloped by the fire of divine mercy, but it's not going to be consumed. It's going to be beautified. You're going to be in the fire. In one of the apocryphal gospels, the Gospel of Philip, or the Gospel of Philip, I think, or the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says this: those who are close to me are close to the fire, and those who are apart from me are in the cold. So that Christ, and Hebrews says, with this vision of the transfiguration of the entire cosmos, not see a new heaven and a new earth, all the trees, all the plants, all the animals will be there as well in their glory. The animals are destined for glory as well, according to the form that God gave them at the moment of their conception. Everything that God creates is destined for eternity. It's limited, it's finite, but for that reason, it is not dead. It is alive, and it will be alive with the life of God to the extent that it's able to hold it as a finite creature. God is infinite in his glory. We are finite, but we are meant to be little filaments within the light bulb of God's cosmic glory. So everything is going to be glowing with the light of God. This is how it was in the garden. When Adam and Eve saw the fruit trees, they saw the burning bush. They knew that in eating this fruit, they were tasting the very sweetness of God. God was in the tree, and the tree was in God, and yet God was not the tree, and the tree was not God, but there was something of God in the tree. The fruit was sweet because it was a participation in the sweetness of God. And food to this day is meant to be a sacramental connection with the sweetness and the goodness and the nourishment and the delight that we take in drinking in eating food and in drinking wine. The whole vision of Isaiah in chapter 2 and 26, if you look at the visions of Isaiah, he's got these visions of the final times. It's Mount Tabor. It's on this mountain, the Lord shall establish this mountain as the highest mountain, and all peoples shall be gathered here. And there will be rich wines, rich foods, and choice wines, and all the people of the world will delight in the communion of God. This is the vision of Israel from the beginning. Israel was meant to lead all peoples back to the mountain of the Lord, and there they were to be transfigured with him and inebriated with the Holy Spirit and on fire with the fire of divine mercy. And the whole mountain was meant to glow like it glowed when God's cloud came down on it, and Moses entered the mountain cloud and the fire, and Moses came out resplendent with the fire of God. Those are all previews of what we're going to be like, what the world's going to be like. And the difference between us and the saints is the saints already see that. They see it in every person. They see it in every part of nature. They even see it like Mother Teresa. They see it in the gutter with the aborted baby. They see the image of God's glory, and they see that person, the aborted baby, the disfigured street urchin, purposely disfigured by his mother in order to make money on the street. They see the glory of God. They see that person fully reconstituted to the acorn oak that they were meant to become when God conceived them from all eternity before the foundation of the world. So Christianity is about acquiring this eschatological vision, this vision of all things glorified at the end, and also the realization that the powers of so-called evil that impede this progress, they can only do so for so long. They do not possess the same power as the power that is within us. The power of glory within us is greater than the powers that operate in the world. The tactics of the devil are only delay tactics. They cannot prevent the inevitable. And the inevitable is the recapitulation, the restitution, the, what's the word the fathers use? The restoration of the reconciliation of all things in Christ, meaning everything's back in its proper place. Everybody is shining with the glory that God knew that he created them with in the beginning and has intended them for since before the foundation of the world. So if you begin with this resurrection, transfiguration, Christ in glory image of the Christian life, it gives you the light and the hope and the warmth to endure whatever is going on. Whatever is going on, it pales in comparison to what we shall be. And St. Paul says that all the time because he was gifted with this vision, just like that, as a way of proclaiming this gospel that I'm proclaiming to you. So Paul drew out the implications of these gospels like I'm trying to do on these Wednesday gatherings. His language is all this, Paul's language, he's trying to read the historical Jesus through the lens of the cosmic transfigured Jesus in glory, because that's the only Jesus he ever knew. So he's able to read all these things back into the gospel. And Paul is able to say to people who are losing hope, he says, listen, he says, if you only knew the risen Christ, if you knew the one who lives within you, you would realize he's your hope for glory. He lives within you. And eye has not seen, ear has not heard, nor has it even entered the human mind what glory God has destined for those who trust him. So Paul operated from this vision, and once this vision is acquired, Christianity becomes a religion of continuous joy rather than trudging up the hill of Calvary to unite ourselves to the sufferings of Christ. Christ's victory on the cross was his victory. It was his complete surrender. The joy of his surrender far outweighed the sufferings of his body. It was what allowed him to be so utterly peaceful on the cross, even though he was in great physical pain. And it's a glimpse of that same glory that allowed Mary to be at peace, even though she was in agony watching her son die. She knew that what he had in store for the world would make all of this look as so much nothingness in retrospect.
Did the people believe Paul?
The people didn't know like me, the people didn't know what Paul was talking about. So no, but they kind of did. They kind of got a glimpse, but they thought he was they thought he was,
It's quite a story.
it's quite a story. And what I just told you is quite a story. But until you can start reading the Gospels through that lens and realize that Jesus does everything he does out of mercy, tells all the stories he tells out of mercy, even the scary stories, he tells them as Charles Dickens used to say. That's where Charles Dickens got the idea of Mr. Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Future. He said, I told the scary story about Scrooge, that Scrooge had these scary dreams. They awakened him out of his stinginess. It took a frightening nightmare. And so Charles Dickens said, that's because I realized Jesus was telling scary nightmare stories to the Pharisees in order to awaken them, because their whole life was a nightmare, but they didn't know it. They were still asleep. So they were living a nightmare. If they could only awaken to the day, they could come out into the light. But with some people, when you tell them a scary story, they take it so literally that they just get more scared. So it doesn't always work. And Jesus found that it doesn't always work. And he found out that even his parables had the opposite effect sometimes of what he was hoping them they would have. And they doubled. They increased. I mean, ultimately, Jesus went to the cross because he realized I'm just a near occasion of sin. I'm not helping anybody here anymore, except those who have followed me. But everybody is meant to follow me, but I don't know what else to do except to return to my Father and let him do the rest. So
A lot of times a father will tell stories to their kids
Yeah.
to not always to scare them, but to just enlighten them in some way.
usually, I mean, some studies have been done by this. We got just a couple of minutes here. Fear and stories of hell are appropriate to people at certain stages in their development. People are motivated to go from arithmetic to algebra, sometimes through the fear of being left behind by their classmates. But ultimately, fear has to give way to something else. So, and Jesus knew this. He knew that they were a people who were afraid of God. So he wants to draw them out of that fear of God as well. But he does tell them stories that trade on the fear of God, and he puts small wrinkles in the story to indicate to them that God is not they don't need to be quite as afraid of God as they are at current. But he doesn't try to take them from arithmetic fear of God to quantum computing no fear of God. He can't do that in one step. So he does it gradually with his parables. And he even uses their language of heaven and hell in order to give them a new vision of paradise that makes hell irrelevant and something of their own choosing. So we'll leave it at there for the moment, and I hope that was helpful today, but let's finish with the glory be, and then I'll stay around for a little bit to answer any questions. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay.